So the next step is to actually begin the deployment and provisioning of our infrastructure. So I've gone over here to our repo here. Let me just clean up the URL. It's essentially GitHub Cloud Performance Monitoring, and the repository here is the Prometheus Grafana scripts. There's more in here than just that, but that will get us started. So I'm going to go ahead and clone this repo here to my local computer. Once I've done that, I'm just going to say git clone, paste in that URL, and then go to the Prometheus folder to show you what's happening there. So once again, to kind of explain what's happening, there's some scripts here that fire off after the VM is provisioned, and that is to install Prometheus and Grafana, and later we'll talk about the node part. But for the moment, you'll notice these two important files, Azure Deploy Parameters.json and Azure Deploy. There are other versions here if you want accelerated networking, both for the parameters and for the regular deploy, but we're going to focus on these two here, the Azure Deploy.Parameters.json and Azure Deploy.json. So in the next step, we're going to actually provision these VMs. We'll take a look first inside these files to kind of explain what's happening, and then once we fire this process off, we'll be able to actually see the VM fire up with all the software automatically installed. So at this point, we are ready for the deployment. So let's look at these files again. There's only three files we're concerned with here for the moment. The do deploy, that's just a shell script that's going to fire off the deployment process. There's going to be an Azure Deploy Parameters file, and that kind of defines what we want to pass in, such as machine name, DNS, things like that, password to log in. And the other one is the Azure Deploy.json, and that one specifies the actual template, the details about the VM that we wish to deploy. So let's first take a look at the do deploy file, and you'll see a couple simple things. That we want to create a resource group in the West US with the name Prometheus-RG. And in the line below, we actually kick off the deployment into that resource group, passing in the template file. Again, this has all the details about the VM we wish to deploy. It also includes post-deployment provisioning scripts to install Grafana and Prometheus. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the parameters file, like I said, that's to pass in passwords, DNS entries, things that you want to change between deployments. So let's walk through some of these. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these files here. Let's go look at the Azure Deploy Parameters file that we talked about a minute ago. And you can see here some simple stuff. We're going to have the admin username to remote in with. We're going to have, and you can see that here on this line, we're going to have a password. I just made one up here. Obviously, you probably want to choose your own. The name of the VM, we'll just call this Prometheus VM, and a DNS label, we'll call this just DNS Prometheus. And the VM size that we're passing in is a standard DS2. Later we'll talk about the accelerated networking piece, but for now, to keep things simple, let's ignore that. The second file, and we're not going to go over this whole file because it's quite significant, it's the Azure Deploy file, which is really all the details of the VM itself. A couple things to note here. Put some line numbers here to really talk easier. These are the default values that are acceptable, and because we talked about the DS2, I'm going to add that as a supported option here, just so to be clear that you understand what this is. So we're going to say DS2 here. So again, these are just a repetition of the parameters. You really don't need to play with this. You need to make sure, though, whatever you want to pass in the parameters is available here in this list. Pretty small point. We're not going to worry about much else. This is kind of a big, significant file. You can see it's about 300 lines of JSON. Not a lot of fun, but what I do want to point your attention to is these script extensions that you see here. Basically, what we're saying is after the deployment, we want to run these two files here on line 281. And you can see here that essentially it says Prometheus setup CentOS and Grafana setup CentOS. And then here the command to execute on 283, we're basically saying go and run those scripts after you download them. And again, those are just deploying to this raw VM Prometheus and Grafana. Okay, we're ready to do the deployment here. We're going to quit out of this file, and we're ready essentially to do the do deploy command you see here. And the way you do that is you say bash do deploy, hit enter, and then the process will kick off. It'll take a few minutes depending on a variety of environmental things, but pretty much when we're done with this, we will literally have a ready to run or already running Prometheus software package with Grafana as well. And so let's go ahead, wait a couple minutes. When I come back, we'll be able to see at the Azure portal that the machine is provisioned and ready to go. We did have a little bit of an error. We have that it does not take the admin username, so I would like to show you how to fix that here. So I'm going to say Azure deploy parameters.json, and I'm going to go in and admin is not valid. So I'll just say Azure user, whatever you want here, just not admin, and then I'll go ahead and run the deploy again. So we're good to go here. Be back in a couple seconds to actually see, hopefully, a successful deployment.